All right, coming at you almost live from deep down to the bayou, this is Whitman Codes, where Whitman codes. This episode is the absolute beginner's guide to TouchDesigner. So right out the gate, if you're brand new to TouchDesigner, you might be asking yourself, what exactly is TouchDesigner? TouchDesigner is a programming language, a programming environment, a full-on IDE, but what sets it apart from most other programming languages is it is entirely visual, or mostly visual, I should say, and it's very much useful for working with the visual arts. With TouchDesigner, you can make anything you can envision, basically, in terms of visual arts, including augmented reality applications. You can make audio visualizers, data visualizers of all sorts. You can use it to control lighting systems. You can use it to control Ableton. You can use Ableton to control it. And you can do almost all of it with very little or no actual typing of code, depending on how serious you want to get. It's actually very hard to describe what's possible in TouchDesigner, because the more of TouchDesigner that you learn, the more interesting and amazing things you can create with it. But at its core, it's a video compositing engine, a 3D texturing engine, and a data manipulation engine that you can build applications out of, or you could just do some video editing, and you can bend it to many different tasks once you learn the basics. And that's what we want to talk about today, is just the absolute basics, how to get in there and start doing stuff, how to understand the interface, things along that nature. So why should you spend your valuable time here with me learning TouchDesigner? Well, for one thing, TouchDesigner is a lot of fun. Once you've got the basics down, you can experiment with it and do what I call open mic night. That's an actual folder I keep in my TouchDesigner file when I just want to relax and chill out and just play with TouchDesigner and see what's possible without a real goal, which is kind of unique among programming languages, that you can do this sort of lackadaisical programming. But also, TouchDesigner will make you, if you're a coder, a better coder, I think, in general. And if you're not a coder, I think it's a great first language to learn. There's some Python in there that you'll pick up as we go. Right at the end, we're going to try and push that off as far as possible, so you're not scared of that if you're new to coding at all. And try not to think of programming as super hard, because we're not going to do super hard programming. We're going to do fun programming here. But more than that, TouchDesigner will make you a better visual artist if that is something you are interested in, if you use software to do it, right? I would say TouchDesigner has made me better at understanding and using Blender, Unreal Engine, Resolve Fusion and color grading, Ableton, and if I ever bother to open Houdini, which I'm scared to do because I might end up buying it, I think it would make me really wicked smart at Houdini too. So TouchDesigner being so visual, it really helps you get in there and learn stuff without having to type code and chase down bugs and carry a lot of what we call the mental stack in programming, where when you're typing it all, you have to keep track of a lot of things in your head and you have to visualize stuff. Well, TouchDesigner being so visual, it's showing you the visuals all the time as you're doing it. You don't have to keep all that overhead mentally. You can focus on your task a lot better, in my opinion, in that way. So I think it's really a fun thing to learn and a rewarding thing to learn. But, of course, you can't learn it without getting a hold of it. So now that we got the sales pitch out of the way, and hopefully you're convinced. If you're not convinced, turn the video off. Go away. Let's talk about how to get a hold of TouchDesigner. Right there in our YouTube description, right down below this video, we have a downloads link to TouchDesigner. You can go there. I think you have to sign up. Actually, I know you have to sign up with an account at Derivative, the company that makes TouchDesigner, in order to license your copy of TouchDesigner. Go ahead and do that. Derivative has not spammed my email, I think, at all. Maybe, one or two confirmation emails and maybe one email like a month or a year. I don't ever remember seeing like an update from Derivative on emails. I might have turned that off, but they're not like those jerks at LinkedIn where you got 30 email lists to unsubscribe to from the moment you start on LinkedIn. So go ahead, pop over to derivative.ca/download and grab either the Windows download or the Mac download, depending on your operating system. TouchDesigner, sadly, criminally, in my opinion, does not have a Linux version available, which is a real bummer because it's on Mac, so you'd think they can move it over to Linux with fairies. I'm not sure what their reasoning behind that is. I think it might be that they're worried about piracy on Linux, which a lot of developers are, and this is an expensive piece of software if you get a pro license or whatever, but I think they'd more than make up for that if they just came out on Linux. Enough of that. Okay, let's move on to installing it. How do you install it? You install it like any other program, and you put a shortcut somewhere you can find it. Okay, moving on. While we're waiting for that to download, let's go ahead and look at some of the other stuff we have here in our description. So we've got the downloads page, and then we have a lot of TouchDesigner community links in the description as well. TouchDesigner has their own forum which they maintain, which you'll find a link to down there. There is a TouchDesigner help group on Facebook. They're really good. There is a TouchDesigner Discord. There is also a TouchDesigner Reddit. That should be enough to get anyone started. After they've watched this video, you can start, joining the community. The community is really nice. And after you've watched this video and you've got the basics, you can easily jump into some of the more advanced tutorials by some of the great TouchDesigner teachers on the internet. We've got Bailim here, I believe is how he pronounces his name. Matthew Reagan, the Interactive and Immersive HQ, Patika 12, Noto the Talking Ball, and Simon Alexander Adams. After you go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my YouTube, you can go ahead and subscribe to all those guys if you decide TouchDesigner is something you indeed do want to pursue. All of them excellent teachers, all of them worth your time, and they all appreciate the subscription. So go ahead and do that. So at this point, I'm going to assume you've downloaded TouchDesigner, you've got it installed on your system, you got your license key, your free license key. I don't know if I mentioned that this is actually a free piece of software. And you've launched TouchDesigner, hopefully, and you should be looking at something very confusing, which looks exactly like this. It is a picture of some beans, and then the beans start moving, and the beans are on a box for some reason, and the beans are just moving again, and it's very confusing. You're like, why is there a wiggly beans going on here? Well, this is a demo for people who kind of know what's going on already. We're not going to pay too much attention to it. Right now, though, we're just going to go through the basics of the interface. So, obviously, on Mac or PC, you're going to have your operating system provided window wrapper, which you see up here, which shows you your file name, where it's at, and you got your minimize, your shrink it a little bit, your throw it somewhere buttons there, and your X button to exit out of the program. And then up here, you've got a very, let's say, threadbare set of traditional menus. So you got file, let you quit, let you save, let you export, don't worry about it. You got edit here, which you'll notice does not even have copy and paste in it or cut. It's just undo, redo, and a couple of things. Don't worry too much about that, but do be aware that your preferences are right there if you ever want to see that. You've got your dialogues thing. You can just ignore all of these right now. We're not going to need these for a while. You're going to be hearing that a lot in any beginning programming tutorial is ignore, 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 and as we get to it, we'll find it, right? And you got help. This is one area TouchDesigner really excels in, is giving you a lot of different access to help very easily. The rest of this row right up here till you get to this is just help buttons of different kinds. This ignore, that ignore. 60 frames per second tells you your frames per second real time. You want to keep that on most of the time. We'll get into situations where you don't want to keep that on, but as you can see, this is happening, in real time, which is one of the great benefits of TouchDesigner as we discussed. You have this thing here, it tells you what just happened. So keep an eye on that from time to time. And then you got the second row here. We're only going to pay attention to these two buttons here. We're not going to pay any attention to these for a while. So these two buttons up here, this one takes you into Preform mode. If that happens, you might have just a full screen of wiggly beans. And if you actually try and exit out of the program right now, it's not a great idea. So if you ever accidentally hit that button, just intentionally then hit the escape button, and you're brought right back to your TouchDesigner interface, okay? This weird icon here, these are both weird icons, is your open palette button. The palette is this area here under this blue thing. It's a series of directories that offer you these guys here that you can, grab and drag over here and use, but we're going to ignore that, and we're actually going to get rid of it right now because it's just going to take up screen real estate, and that's something, again, that we'll learn down the line. Right here, you have Open Viewer, so if I want to view just that little guy right there, that's what that's going to do, is just throw me a viewer for that. Again, not something we're too concerned with right now. What we are concerned with is this guy here, the address bar. So this is a typical address bar anywhere that you would see on, like, let's say Firefox. You have an address on Firefox, and it has a lot of the same functionality, right? You can go back, you can go forward. If there's a forward to go, you can throw a bookmark in, or you could go home. and you can add stuff to the thing here, but we haven't talked about what this is yet at all, so that would be not a great idea, right? So why is there an address bar in TouchDesigner? Well, TouchDesigner operates just like Windows or Mac or Linux in that everything has to be in a directory. And when you open this, we're in a directory right now. And that directory is called Project 1 right here, as you see it. And there's actually more places you could go in Project 1. You could go into Geo 1, ignore that. But if you want to go up above Project 1 and take a look at the entire file, so you're at your root directory, which would be the exact same thing as my computer on Windows or the / directory on a Unix-based system. Same thing with Mac. You just click this / here to go back, and you go back like that. And now you see that there's a little bit more to this file than you were first presented, right? You've got all these guys here. They're all these gray boxes. When you see a gray box, you can typically think of that as a folder, right? So this one, Project 1, is actually the folder we were in. So if we double click it, we're back into where we were. Most TouchDesigner users, though, I suspect will not use this too often. I don't use it too often. I'm aware of how it works, you know, and I play with it and see how it works. Like, I know if I click on this guy here, if we click this little button here, it's going to take away the interactive part of it so we can actually see, oh, it's gray. It's a folder I could go into, right? If I have it selected and I click this little guy, it's going to throw me into that folder like that, and then I could look around and see what's in that folder. But typically, I'm going to use the U key on the keyboard, which if you're working here and you don't have anything, you know, selected here that could take text, if you hit the U key, it's going to bring you up, right? Up a level. Now we're back here looking at the geo, and if we were to double click it, we go inside it. That's usually my navigation tactic in TouchDesigner. This has its usage, you'll get it later, but what we're going to be doing is so small that you don't have to worry too much about using this because we're not going to go very many folders deep. You can at any point just go U and come up here to the top. Okay, so that is your big introduction to the address bar and navigating your network. Okay, so TouchDesigner terminology. There's not much of it, but we're going to run through it real quick. Right here, you're looking at your file, you know, and this is a network. We were talking a minute ago about networks. So this is a network. If you jump in this guy, this is also a network. And this makes perhaps a little bit more sense because you can see things are obviously connected together through networks. What are these things? These things are called operators. And we're going to start playing with those here real quick, I promise you, after we get through our initial setup. So you have networks composed of operators. The networks live on this giant grid. This is probably 0, 0 on it. If you're familiar with, you know, algebra or math in general and graphing things, you know, 0, 0, and then 0, 1 or 1, 1 at that point there, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about that. You'll never need to know that. The important thing is that this is 0, 0, and it goes on in every direction forever or until you've moved far enough that maybe your computer crashes, but you will never do that because, look, I'm just going and going and going, right? And it's keeping track of it. Now, you might do that, and you might go, I can't find my old stuff. Maybe I need to zoom out with my scroll wheel and see it. That's one way to do it. But if you're set up normally, which we'll do right now, we'll come in here to the preferences, and we'll look at the network preferences. If you're set up normally on a brand new install of TouchDesigner, this guy is typically clicked, mouse wheel navigation. Mouse wheel navigation in TouchDesigner, if you have that clicked, is going to mean that if you come backwards far enough, let's zoom in here with our mouse wheel. If you come backwards far enough, you will jump out of your network. That kind of bugs me, so I don't do it. Let's jump back in here with a simple double click and look at this network, and let's scroll ourselves to where we can't see anything and we're confused, like, oh no. And then if we go too high up, we lose it and we come back, and that's kind of annoying, right? But if we scroll and 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 we're just completely lost, the way we get back is just unwheel a little bit and it's going to go, okay, there's nothing here in the middle. I'm just going to take you back to what you were actually working on here. Another way to do it is just with your H key on your keyboard, just throw a keystroke at it. H, it's going to home you. It's going to bring you home, and that's fine too. So that's your 2 tips there. How do you move around your network? Well, you've seen me moving it around. This is just a simple left click, click and drag. If you want to select things, you use a right click. That's going to select everything. So that's basically it for moving around the network. Now you're going, well, there's these things. Where do they come from? What are they? Blah, 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 blah. These are called operators, and they're doing some really weird stuff here to make some beans happen on a cube and wiggle some beans here on just a flat image as well. We're not going to look at what any of this stuff is doing. What we're going to focus on in this tutorial is getting you able to understand this at the end of the tutorial, but this is all quite confusing for a new beginner. So what I want you to do, if you're playing the home game, one, remember that anything in your network is an operator, okay? That's all you can put in here is these operator guys. And two, I want you to follow me now, and I want us to back up all the way to the top, so you should see this slash here, and I want you to double-click on the field, just a simple double click on the field, and it brings you up this dialog. We're going to get into what this is in just a second, but what we're going to do here is we're going to come over here and we're going to click comp, and we're going to come here to container on the second column here. We're going to click container. We're just going to drop a new container on there, and we're going to name it Tutorial Playground. You probably saw how I did that. If you didn't, it's just right there. You just click the name. It gives you the text guy. If you double click it, you can select it, and you can type it in. Call it whatever you want. All right, so we're going to do that, and then we're going to jump in here, and we are going to save our file once we're in this new empty network that we've created for ourselves here. So make your tutorial playground container. You need another look at that. I'll show you here. Container, drop it, and name it. Okay, good. I don't need that one, though, so I'm just going to get rid of it with a nice, quick delete keystroke. Click on your tutorial playground, make sure it's highlighted in green, and let's jump in to our new empty network called Tutorial Playground. Excellent. Before we start talking about operators, perhaps we should save the file so that none of our work goes and gets lost, right? So that's pretty simple in TouchDesigner. Like every other application, you can throw a Command or Control S at it, or you can come up here and click Save. But I don't want you to do that yet. If you did, no big deal. But what you want to actually do is create a project folder. So let's go File, Create Project Folder. All right, now we got this. It's going to make a folder on our desktop. The project folder is going to be called New Project. We don't actually want it to be called that. Let's call it YTTD Playground for YouTube TouchDesigner Playground. Okay, that's kind of a convention in programming. If you've not programmed before, sometimes we'll call a thing a playground if we're not going to do serious work in it, or if we just want to tool around in it. So go ahead, do that. Click the rename file to YouTube TD Playground, and go ahead and click all these little guys, and it's going to build us a directory structure and save our file in that directory structure so we don't have to build this all ourselves. And it gives you most of what you need. I usually add an export photo. Let's go ahead and hit create here. There you go. I'm actually going to make the exports right now by just hitting new folder and putting in exports. And now go ahead and click like that and click save. So you're not actually saving it into that exports folder. You just want it right there. No. Save. There we go. Now, on Windows or Mac, if you actually go and dig up the folder, you should see this. Now, something interesting about TouchDesigner is if you have a project folder going and you throw another Control S at it for a save, and let's go look at our project folder, it not only saved it, it immediately made a backup of it for us. And you're going, well, this is going to get messy, because if I save every 5 minutes or something, like I probably should as a coder, or anybody working on anything, you should probably throw a Control S in there pretty often. If you do that, am I going to end up with 100 of these clogging up the front end of my folder? Actually, no. If we go ahead and spin it around back to TouchDesigner here, and we go ahead and throw another Control S at it, and then we come back, Alt-Tab back into our folder, you'll notice that it's added yet another folder here called Backups. And if you open Backups, let's open it in a new window, it's got that number 1 in it. Now we just have, our working file and then number 2. And if we throw another Control S, and we come back, now we got number 3. If we look here, now it's moved that. So it's backing up. Every time you make a save, it's going to back up, which is not too much of an issue because, as you can see, these guys are 5 kilobytes a piece right now because there's not much in them. But they stay pretty slim. As long as you're not, bundling up a huge movie or a bunch of images in here, you can easily zip this whole folder up and email it off to a buddy, and they can open the TouchDesigner project you were working on. They can work on it. So that's just a quick tutorial about how we want to set up our projects generally. Okay, now we get to the meat of things where we actually start doing things. We've only so far created one folder for ourselves inside of our project, our tutorial playground folder. As you can see here, we're sitting in it right now. If you want to confirm that, go ahead and pop back up. And then you go, oh, that's tutorial playground. Let's jump into it with a quick double click. As we stated before, you need operators on here to have something do something. So what is an operator? How do we get one on here? That's what we're going to cover right now. There's a couple of ways to get an operator in here. They all focus on the OP dialog. Here we go. Double click, right? Double click on an empty field. You get this bad boy, the OP create dialog. That's not OP from Mayberry. That means operator. It's a tendency of programming languages and programmers to want to use the smallest number of letters possible. Why that is, we can get into someday and how it should stop. But anyway, so we use these terms interchangeably, op or operator, but usually I would just call it an operator for clarity. And what you have here is a tabbed interface with a search bar and a little help button and an X button. So what exactly are we looking at here? Well, the easiest way to explain it's going to be to come over here and let's add a movie file in from the tops. Now, why is it called tops? Well, remember the op means operator. Top here means texture operator. Now, don't get scared by the word texture, because all texture means is image or series of images. And I'll prove that to you right now, and you can follow right along. Come here, click this movie file in, and get yourself a bright yellow banana. This is your standard movie file in. You're going, movie file in. This is obviously just a static image of a banana sitting here. That is exactly what it is. But TouchDesigner considers this the same thing as a movie. If you want it to be a movie, let's make it a movie, okay? So we have this operator selected here. We have this guy over here, which is similar to a palette type interface or an inspector interface. If you're coming from software that uses inspectors, this will make a lot of sense to you. It's just not as pretty, because TouchDesigner is not a very pretty program. It can make very beautiful things, but it's just not very pretty. That's derivative's prerogative, I suppose. So this is loading a file from somewhere. If you want to see where, you've got this file guy here. Without explaining this yet, let's go ahead and let's hit this plus button and change the file name. And let's remember in the future that if you see this plus button, which bears little to no resemblance to anything in any other operating system, right? It doesn't match like Windows. It doesn't match Mac. It's, you know, this is production software, so it's very much written by its team for its team. But if you click this plus button, it's going to bring you up a traditional Windows File Explorer, and it's going to be in this Program Files, Derivative, TouchDesigner, Samples, Map folder. So you're in the folder TouchDesigner provides with an interface that just says, hey, here's a bunch of stuff you might want. And of course, map is not the greatest name for this, maybe, if you're not a programmer, but we're going to get you there, so don't worry about it. So all of these are static images, but if we come in here to nature, these are movies. So instead of just having a banana back there, let's go ahead and click on movie1.mp4, and let's click open. And now we have an actual video playing. So that's one thing you want to remember right away is texture means video or image or series of images, right? Right off the bat. Cool. Now let's talk about the features common to all operators and kind of the different classes of operator. When we say class, we mean that they're all operators, but they're different, you know, like different breeds of dogs. They all have 4 legs, they all bark, they all have a tail. But some dogs are working dogs, some dogs are relaxing dogs, some dogs are just neurotic. So this is a texture operator. This is for working on video. Let's double click again and let's look through our different types here very briefly and kind of talk a little bit about how to use this dialog. So like I said, this is the texture operator. Think of that as movies, or think of it as movies and images, up to you. Just start associating that word texture with movie in your head, right? You have channel operators. These deal more with numerical values and sound. We'll get into what those are eventually, but just for fun, let's throw one in. Let's type right now, just go ahead and type Noise. And you'll see it has highlighted this noise guy. So that's its search function. It's going to do its best to find you what you're looking for. And there are a lot of these. Don't be intimidated. We're not going to use all of them. But it's got your noise function there. So let's go ahead, and you can either click it once it's highlighted, or you can just throw a return at it, and it's going to bring it out for you. And now you've got a channel operator. What exactly is going on in here in its window, you don't have to worry about right now, because like I said, we're focusing right now on just the things that are the same about all these panels known as operators. We'll come over and we'll double click again, and this time we're going to click on SOP. These are surface operators. Now surface means 3D surface. That means that these guys are going to create, in a lot of instances, 3D objects. So come over here and grab box and drop it on your field. Okay? And do me a favor, you're saying this is just a square. Okay, let's go ahead and hit this viewer active flag down here in the corner. We'll talk about it more in a bit, but let's just hit it, and let's put our mouse over our square here and be like, how is this a box? Let's scroll backwards a little bit on your mouse, scroll down or up, depending on how much Apple has rewired your scrolling. and you can turn it, and you can look at it. You can see there that that is an actual 3D object in 3D space. So that's what that one is. Double click again. Let's come over here to material operators, and we're going to pick a Fong, which is a donut. And wow, we've got a Fong. What is this used for? This is used for picking a color that we might apply to this thing, and it, it's doing some math in there to see where the light and shadows and how all that stuff works. That's wonderful. It's beyond the scope of this discussion on why it's a donut shape and how you can turn that into a coffee cup, but I guarantee you can. One more, we're going to come over here to DAT, and we are going to click text, and we're going to drop that on there, and we're going to play with this viewer active diamond one more time. So zoom in a little bit, click your viewer active, and now click inside your box here, and just to get a little bit more of a feel of how viewer active works, type, hi, my name is what Slim Shady. Okay, cool. Unclick it, and now you'll notice we have a text file in here. This can be used for a lot of different things. It's obviously very helpful in coding, but you don't actually need to type a lot of code. If you just want to pull this text out of this, we'll show you how to do that later. One more? Nope. Yes, one more. Okay, so we got our textures we covered, channels, think sound and numbers, surfaces, think 3D objects, materials, think painting 3D objects, data, just think text right now. If you've never coded before, if you have coded before, think coding. And then composite, which is a very special class. We'll get into all that later, but let's grab another container and we'll drop it on here, and you'll notice that it is one that we can, if we double click, we can jump into it and start, we could actually start building more stuff in here if we wanted to. We don't want to right now, but if you want to do that and throw a noise on there, you're perfectly welcome to. So that's it. So now we have every class of operator, more or less, every different breed of operator here. And if you look at them, you'll notice this one has this little bullseye guy. It's got its lightning striker. It's got its X. It's got its lock. It's got its name. And it's got its diamond to turn on and off your interaction with it. Same thing here. Bullseye, lightning, arrow, lock, name, diamond. This also has a little blue guy here for texture operators and also for channel operators. This little blue guy is going to throw the image that it's making on your field. So now you can see it. So now this is very helpful if you're doing some work, especially if you don't have multiple monitors and you want to see the results of your work in really, as big a space as it can reasonably fill on your screen. That's very helpful. These also work for your channel operators. This blue guy works for those. But if you come over here to box, it's used for a different thing because now we're into 3D world. But for these guys, which are very much both 2D, this is a two-dimensional movie. This is a two-dimensional series of numbers along this graph here. For two-dimensional guys, if you hit that blue display flag, you get it on the back screen, and then, if you were to Control-C, Control-V, it's still lit up. You get another one, and another one, and another one. You can put as many of them back there as you want. Some people love that feature. Some people don't use it at all. There's other ways of doing that. But what we are here to talk about is basic operator functionality universal to all of them. So we covered so far the comp class, which contains the container, the video class, which is tops, the numbers class, the numbers and sounds class is what we're going to think about it for now, which is, is there another one of those? Oops. Which is a chop. We call it top, chop, comp, top, chop. Now 3D objects, SOP, same thing. We already discovered that if we click this guy, we can manipulate it, we can rename it. These guys have some different meanings. If you mouse over them long enough, it'll give you the information. TouchDesigner is really good about that, as most modern programs are. And all we got to do now to move on to the next part of our video is highlight that this has the same series of buttons. The viewer, the clone immune button, which is the lightning strike, the bypass, the lock, the naming, the display flag, or the interaction flag, and then some other flags here that you don't need to worry about at this point. Same thing with our surface guy, right? We got all three of these buttons. Our surface guy does not have a bypass because it's not doing anything to bypass. And finally, our data guy, think of this as a text guy, but we call them DATs in TouchDesigner, same thing. You got the exact same thing here as everybody else, right? Bullseye, lightning strike, arrow, lock, name, a flag here, and of course a viewer active, so if you want to interact with that. And again, feel free to put some Slim Shady in there for no apparent reason, and just get used to the idea that if you want to actually touch and use these things, you got that viewer active flag on and off. Okay, now let's talk about what these little buttons do and why you might want to use them. We'll do a little organization here and try and fit this all on a screen in a way that everybody can see it really well. Okay, so number one up here in the corner, all this does is turn off your viewer. That does not mean that video is not still happening. If you want to, you can right now drag a line out of there and hit tab. That's going to bring this guy up, and just type in NUL and throw a return at it, null. And as you can see, the data is still, these are called wires. The data is coming out your out port here into your wire and into this null, which is just a place to look at your data, really, is what a null is. It doesn't have any other functionality except to show you your data. And it's still coming out. So that's important to understand. It's still processing this. You know, it's still doing its thing. It's just not taking the trouble to use up your GPU or your CPU to render it here, right? So if you undo it, now I've got two things rendering here, the exact same thing. So, you know, it's doing it twice, right? But if you do that one, now it's only doing it once. And if you don't need to look at it at all, you do that one again, boom. That can sometimes save you some processing power, or it can just cut down on distractions. Depending on your workflow, you might need it for one or both. Right now, let's turn those back on, and let's talk about our little lightning striker. You don't need to worry about it. Okay, done with lightning striker. Now, let's talk about this arrow. This arrow here is a bypass. Let's do some interesting stuff so we can kind of get a feel for TouchDesigner here. Let's get another movie file in here. And we have ourselves a banana. Let's go ahead, pull out of here, and let's type a tab, and let's type switch. All right, we got a banana there. We got a banana there. So all I did there was I grabbed our out port, and I drug a wire into there, and now we got a switch, which will switch us between our two different modes of video. And to get it to this null here where we can see where it's coming through, it's right there. Interesting, right? This is just a freebie we're doing right now. So on a switch, it's going to start numbering at 0, which is common in programming. We will get into why later, but our first thing is always 0. Don't worry about it. Just, if you're off by 1, just go, oh, I forgot to start counting at 0 as 1. Computers can't, they don't have a concept of 0. Or love, because they don't have a soul. So anyway, if we have data coming through here and we go, okay, I want to bypass this. Now what's going to happen? It's going into that switch. It's completely gone. That's different, right, than doing this guy here. That just says close the viewer. You're still getting the data out. If you don't want this doing anything, right, just don't send any data out. There's nothing moving across this now because we just said completely bypass it. What's important to understand about that is that if you hit here and bypass, it's just going to let whatever data is flowing through it continue to flow through it. It's just not going to do any work on it, right? So the way a switch works, as we were stating before, is it starts at 0, and then every time you move up a number, it switches to however many inputs it has. So if we change this straight up to 1, now it's on the next one. Now we bypass it. It just defaults back to its original state, right? But if this was something else, let's throw in here a level, which is basically, I don't know how old you are if you remember ever having to set up controls on a television set for contrast and stuff. That's basically what a level is. Not exactly, but we'll talk about that later. But if we set up this level here, and we just yank up the brightness, we can all agree that we understand what brightness is, I hope. And the banana's coming in here. It's cranking up the brightness, and then it's coming out. But if we hit that bypass, banana comes in, banana goes out, no cranking up the brightness. So that's a quick overview of the bypass. Next up, every container has a lock. What does a lock do? A lock is probably better explored by switching over to this guy here. We can delete our banana for now. We will get back to the infamous TouchDesigner banana eventually. I promise we'll see it again in this tutorial. A lock says freeze. That's what a lock says. A lock says, hey, stop what you're doing. Take whatever is happening inside my container here, freeze it, and just send that down the line. Now, let's get rid of that level too. Why is this useful? Well, let's say that you had, instead of this, you had Avengers Infinity War. And someone had asked you to take Avengers Infinity War and turn up the brightness point, just a little bit and send it back to them. Well, in TouchDesigner, like I said, we have those very small file system, right? We would maybe put Avengers Infinity War in our movies directory and then pull it in here into TouchDesigner, and we would land it here, and then we would throw a level on it, and we'd crank up that brightness, and then we would email them back. Well, you don't want to email them back all of Avengers Infinity War. Maybe you just want to email them back one single frame of Avengers Infinity War with that brightness turned up. Why? I have no idea. That movie's already been color graded. But let's say you wanted to do that. Well, the way you would do it is you would just click that, and then you just email them your TOE file. You notice up here, YouTube Playground 3.toe. That's your typical file extension for TouchDesigner. You just email them back, and that means that all it's going to save in this TOE file is this one single frame. So that's very helpful in situations like that. That's why you'd want to do it. Or maybe you want to color grade just by one frame and then let it play later. You could do it that way, or any number of possible reasons. But the thing to remember about your lock icon is when you hit it, whatever is being processed inside your operator is now frozen in time. The rest of it doesn't, for all intents and purposes, exist until you unlock it. And if you unlock it, the frame that you stored is going to be gone forever. If I unlock this, it's going to warn me. This will discard lock changes. I go unlock. If I hit Command Z, it's going to freeze it, but it's just going to freeze it on a random frame. Whatever frame was playing through it at the time. It's not going to freeze it on a specific frame. It's not going to actually Control Z, because it just throws it. When you do this, this operation cannot be undone. It doesn't say that, but that's true. This operation cannot be undone. So think, when you see this and it annoys you, think about what might happen in the future. We go, okay, I'm going to need to use TouchDesigner to send a sample to a customer. That's why this is in there primarily. There's other uses for it. As in programming, there's a lot of uses for everything. Go ahead, unlock that. And now let's talk about what exactly an operator is. Now that we know the interface of these operators, let's talk about data flow for just a hot minute in TouchDesigner. TouchDesigner data flows through these wires and through a different kind of wire, which we'll get to eventually. But it flows through a solid wire. It comes out and out port and into an in port. Unlike Resolve and some other systems where the wiring on the node setup could potentially come from any direction on the node, and it could be an in or an out, TouchDesigner has said, you know what, let's just make it read like English. When you put something over here on the right, on the left, if you come out of it to the right and you put another thing there, data is going to flow from left to right, right? So if I do this and put an input there, it's going to flow that way. You might be a little confused about what's going on there. It doesn't really matter. What is important here is that your data is always going to flow from left to right. So when you see these little notches here on the left-hand side, those are inputs. Those are outputs. The other thing you want to consider is that a purple guy has to connect to a purple guy. A green guy has to connect to a green guy. A blue guy has to connect to a blue guy. A yellow guy has to connect to a yellow guy. And a hideous pinkish color guy has to connect to another pinkish color guy. I cannot come up here and take this data without doing anything to it and throw it here into that guy. It's just not going to let me. It's just going to go, what are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to do? Right? If I put it up there and let it go, nothing happens. So be aware of that. Finally, let's talk about what is an operator. Let's go ahead and drag select and spike the whole shebang that we just made with a quick delete key. And we'll double click on the field. And let's come up here to tops and let's get a noise top going. This is a noise top. Noise is quite crucial to a lot of TouchDesigner workflows. What noise is a computer's attempt at making a random image. So when you think of an operator, you think of something that maybe takes input. We'll double click here again. We put a movie file in. Its input actually, isn't handled from its left side. Its movie file in comes from its inspector panel, right? But when you use a generally a top's going to have an input and an output, most of the time. If it doesn't, there's a reason and you can't force it. At any rate, what this is a very small program. Maybe not that small. We can't really see inside it. But what this is a thing that says, okay, if you've got inputs, I'll take them and I'll work with them based on what's going on over here, which we are going to get into in some pretty good detail in a minute. I will work with them in here, and then I will shoot it down the line. Let's do a null. And then I will shove it down the line, right? So it's going to... Let's give it a banana. Told you that banana was coming back. We give it this banana. It's set up default to do some compositing, which is just layering one thing over another by a certain set of rules. And then it's pushing the banana out. So when you think of an operator, think of something that takes some data in, or creates some data, or takes some data and blends some data, whether that data be audio, video, 3D, numbers, letters, it doesn't matter. Takes some data in, does something to it, pushes that data down the line. That is how operators work in general. Now, we're going to delete everything here but the noise, and we are going to talk about parameters, right? So when we click this, we've had this box over here floating for a long time. We haven't really talked about it, what it is. We have said that it is an inspector, and it allows you to, change values on things. So let's bring this up pretty big, and we're just going to grab this slider here and very slowly bring it down. And look at that. The period number is changing, and by changing that number, we have turned what was a pretty interesting little image of what looked like clouds or something, depending on how you respond to this particular Rorschach test, into basically VHS static, old school analog static, right? If we bring it the other way, you'll notice we're zooming in. So that's the primary function of your inspector, is to change values on what is happening during the processing in there of your stuff. And you can just think of the period as a zoom, right? So, one thing to know about TouchDesigner, two things to know about TouchDesigner. One, TouchDesigner loves numbers between 0 and 1. That's very important to know. Just pipe that in your smoke and put it. And two, when you want to change a value, if you do a long left click, it's going to bring you up this kind of awkward looking thing. What this is, it says, hey, you want to change this value, but maybe you don't want to be bound by having to fight through this thing. If you wanted, 1.5, you probably don't have the precision to get it, because this slider in particular goes up to 99. This one alternates between 0 and 2. But maybe you wanted to go to 3, or maybe you wanted to go to 1.0426 or something crazy like that. Okay. The way you do that in TouchDesigner, if you want to exceed or have more precision, you just make your long click here, and you drag the mouse either up or down to whichever value you would like this to increment by. So if you want to increment it by 10, get your mouse clicked, bring it up to 10, and then drag it to the right, and you'll notice it's bumping up by 10, and it's coming down by 10. You'll also notice that we're well in excess of the values it allowed us to do, but it's still doing it, and it's still doing its best. That's really important to know, is that the values that are predetermined are not necessarily the only values it will have. After a certain point, sometimes it just completely, it stops changing the background. Go ahead and double-click that and throw it back to 1. But don't ever think that the slider values, or if there's some other kind of button in here, the values are the only values possible. Actually, slider values are probably the only one you would want to say, okay, this can do other things, because buttons are just going to be off-on, right? A button's a button. But a slider indicates that you could possibly exceed those values and get interesting results, right? Okay. So let's do a little calisthenics here. Let's go up and let's practice going by 10. Whoop, we got that. Great. Okay, bring it back down to something rational. Now let's practice going up by 1. Boop. Bring it up to 1. Cool. Okay. And so on and so forth. If you want a super high level of precision, you're going to be moving by increments of 0.01, which you can just maybe barely see it moving, right? And you're really going to hurt your wrist on this particular one, because that's a very small precision you're operating at. You'll also notice that I am scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, and it just keeps letting me scroll. So just like the network back here is infinite, and we can go as far as we want, you can go as far as you want with numbers, and it's going to keep letting you go, and you don't have to worry about your screen resolution or anything like that. If you keep scrolling, it's going to keep taking that mouse input. Another thing to know about this panel here, our inspector panel, which is called the parameters panel, I'm pretty sure, is that if you have changed something, which will probably happen a lot, and you go, I didn't like that. Obviously, if you throw a Control-Z at it, it's going to, go back through the different values. But this is, okay, we've bumped it up to 61.01 period. It's not really giving us something we can use. If you right-click it, you come down here and you go Reset Parameter, it's going to take it back to its initial state. If all of these are messed up and you go, I've just been playing with it too much, I just want it to come back and get back to its initial state, right? Now I've made this thing, it's useless to me. I was just goofing off, but now I've made something useless. There's two options. You could do this where you double click on the background or hit tab. It's going to bring up that dialog as well. And you could drop that guy, get a brand new noise. But you could also just come over here to your field, right click on this bad boy, go reset all parameters, boom, it'll reset all parameters. So that's important to note as well. Another thing you want to note about this is that this is yet another tabbed interface. We see here on our OP Create dialog that we have this tabbed interface, which in my opinion doesn't super advertise itself as tabs, but that's what this is. Same as a Firefox tab, same as maybe your text editor has tabs in it as well. This is a tabbed interface. This guy up here, also a tabbed interface, also doesn't do a super great job of advertising itself as tabs in my opinion, but that's fine. Okay. So now you know the very, very basics of how to throw things on the network, how to play with this a little bit, and how to delete stuff, move around. So I think we're doing pretty good. Okay, so we've been going at this for about an hour now. You might be feeling a bit overwhelmed. Let's all go ahead and take a deep breath. If that does describe you, if you could use a deep breath, just go ahead and breathe in. And breathe out, because maybe this is your first programming tutorial, and maybe you're like, I don't know, this seems like an infinite canvas. I don't know if I can learn all of that. Don't worry about it, because we've established a foundation, perhaps a fairly shaky foundation, but we know what we need to know. We know how to get around. We know the address bar. We know what an operator is. We know how to make an operator and connect operators and stuff like that. We have the basics of what we need. So now it's time to put that mantra of ours, the programming should be fun. It's a creative endeavor, and it should allow you to be creative without stress. Let's put that into action by hitting our U key, going all the way back up here to the top of our file, double-clicking. We'll make a folder. Hopefully remember how to do that. If not, it'll come to you in time. Chill. Bring in a container, drop it on the field. You can name it whatever you want. I tend to call these open mic night if it's something I'm just going to fool around in, and that's what we are going to do. We're going to have a homework project of just fooling around. So make yourself a container, call it open mic night or daydreaming or notebook or ideas or silly container, whatever you'd like to call it. You don't have to be serious about it. This is your personal file. This is your personal canvas, and let's jump into that container. And now instead of working on learning anything new, what I want to work on is just getting a bunch of stuff on screen that you can play with. And literally, you're just going to be doodling. So number one, we want to be in Topland for this because this is the easiest for us to understand as new TouchDesigner users, that we just want to work on 2D images, whether they're moving or not. Let's go ahead and we're going to hold the Shift key so we can get a lot of these at the same time. It's going to hook them up for us, but that's okay. So just hold your Shift key down. Oop, that's caps lock. Okay, Shift key. And just coming down the first column, go ahead and grab a blur, a circle, a constant, a composite, a crop, edge and emboss are fun ones to play with. A fit is fun. A flip is fun. N has some utility, so you should grab that. Level, we've played with a little bit, so that's a good one to play with. A lookup is a fun one. You know, you might have to do some Googling here, but, you know, you just want to learn how to have fun with your tools. Monochrome makes things black and white. We'll grab one of those. We'll grab a movie file in. We'll grab a null. And what else should we grab here? Coming down the next one, a ramp is a good one. And anything else you see interesting, feel free to throw it on this field here. You're not gonna hurt anything. Let's go ahead and grab a text so we could make some text maybe later. Now what it's done since we did all that was it hooked them all up, and then since we talked earlier before about movie file in doesn't have an N, it just started a new chain. So before you can start having fun, you want to get control of this. You could kind of look through it actually and see what's going on here. And you'll notice a couple of them have errors. We're actually going to give them more errors. This is the most common error you're going to see with tops, is that you have this red X, and if you right-click on it, right-click your red X, it's going to say error right here. This gives you a bunch of information. It's going to say error, not enough sources specified. So when you see that right now, probably every one of these that has that error just doesn't have enough sources specified, meaning it doesn't have enough input. So let's go ahead and make them, most of them have this error. So let's go through them, and we'll left-click, and we'll just start disconnecting everybody one by one. And that'll give you another moment for your subconscious to go, okay, these are the things I'm working with here, a crop, an edge, an emboss, blah, 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 blah. But we'll just go through. It's a little bit monotonous, and we will disconnect all these guys. And as you can see, they're all erroring out, but the program's still running fine because that error isn't affecting anything. It's just saying, hey, this one container here, this operator, can't do what you're asking it to because you're not giving it enough input. So working on through this, we'll do all of that, and we will hunt out our null and put it somewhere where it's kind of to the right-hand side of the screen, and we'll start with our noise, which we should, do we not have a noise here? Oh my goodness, we forgot one of the most fundamental, we forgot one of the most fundamental tops ever. Let's review our typing trick there to highlight it, and you could either click it or just throw a return at it again. It throws it on the screen here. So go ahead and get something like this set up where you just have a lot of things here that you find interesting, and you got a noise on one end and a null on the other end. Plug them together, and now your goal will be to start making this come out down here as something else. How do you do that? Pro tip, right click, insert operator, come in here and grab a composite. Composites are very important. And now that you got this composite, composites have this wider import you see here, which means I can take as many things as you want, as opposed to these little notches here that take one thing a piece. So you can go ahead and, starting from just this setup here, you can start plugging things together, and maybe it makes sense, maybe it doesn't, but your goal here is just to get a feel for the program, a feel for using it, experience, you know, coming in here and playing with your parameters to see what they do. There's no button in here that you should be scared to click. There is no tab in here that you should be scared to adjust values inside of. Nothing you can do is going to hurt your computer. You can play with it. You can, Google things if you want more information on how stuff works. But the big point here is that you should be able to use this to just kind of relax and let your brain process all the stuff that we've gone through before. And when it does get frustrating, I very much suggest you take a walk or a nap or a healthy meal, or have a conversation with a friend, or write in your diary, or watch a show you've been meaning to watch. Don't pound your head against the wall as a programmer. If you get to a point where you want to accomplish something here and you can't do it and you've Googled and you're fighting with it, 9 times out of 10, the best thing you can do for yourself is say, hey, I was doing an exercise to make my brain muscle bigger. And just like when I'm doing a real exercise, the muscle doesn't get bigger while I'm exercising, right? It gets bigger in response to the exercising. So when this starts to feel like you're getting negative returns, the best thing you can do for yourself and your future as a programmer and your ability to make cool things is probably just take a walk or walk the dog or, something where you're not just neck deep in code all day. You can be a very good programmer and still be a well-rounded person. So keep that in mind. Okay. Secondly, you might, through this kind of fumbling about, just seeing what's possible, playing with your parameters and playing with your different tops and Googling around, you might make something really cool. You might do exactly what I've done here, and you get this ball thing, and you're like, this is the greatest thing ever. I'm really proud of it. Go ahead and if you do that, it would really help me out to see that people are actually utilizing these and learning from these videos. That'd be very encouraging for me if you go ahead and okay, I made something awesome. Go ahead, screenshot it, throw it up on Instagram or Imager or some image hosting site and put a link to it in the description. I'd be very proud to go, hey, somebody took my first video course and they made this thing out of, just an hour and 10-minute long video. They managed to intuit how to make something really cool. So if you do that, and you do post it in the comments, I absolutely will put you in the next video I make after that comment is posted, because I'm going to monitor the comments on this. And I will credit you and say, hey, good job. So it would just tickle me pink. Also, if I haven't explained anything well, put a comment in. And as we go into the next part of this, where we move from our white belt to our, blue belt or whatever, and learn more and put more stuff on top of this, I will do my best to answer that question or point you to where that question can go. Programming should be fun. Programming should also be a situation in which you are in no way scared to ask questions. So I would never be hostile against a question. I'll try and answer every question I get to the best of my ability, and I will try to adjust my teaching style as things go on, because I want this to be, I hope this comes through, as broadly accessible as it can possibly be, because I don't think there's any creative person who could not benefit from learning this, and I don't think there's any person who could not learn some coding. And thank you very much for watching. I really do appreciate you spending your time with me. Time is one thing we can never get back. We could always make more money, but we can't always make more time. So if you've chosen to watch through this video and better yourself in some fashion, be proud of yourself, and it really does make me appreciate you. I appreciate that very much. All right, thank you guys very much. That's going to be the end of part 1 of our absolute beginner's guide to TouchDesigner, the greatest programming language in the world as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, thank you, thank you.